This is part 3 of why we need a flat federal tax system. In part 1, we reviewed our current tax rates, in part 2, we reviewed our effective tax rates, and in part 3, we'll scrap the whole system to see why we need a flat federal tax system and how it would save democracy. This is part of a project I started 3 years ago on how to solve our national debt problem, and after thousands of hours of research, the video you're about to watch is my biggest breakthrough so far. So make sure you watch the whole thing and don't skip out early, because there's a good chance you won't be able to see a politician in the same light again after you know what is happening. We reviewed this table extensively in part 2 of this series, and these were the effective tax rates paid by Americans based on their income, which we will be targeting as effective tax rates in our new system, because change can be uncomfortable even when it's necessary and for the betterment of society. So here's what we're going to do to implement a flat federal tax system. First, we're going to get rid of itemizing deductions because that only helps about 11% of Americans. Second, we're going to beef up the standard deduction from $12,200 for a single filer to $18,000, and from $24,400 for a married couple to $36,000 because we just got rid of itemizing deductions. And we're going to call it the Unified Federal Flat Tax Deduction because it blocks all federal taxes. Third, we're going to group all federal taxes into one tax rate called the Unified Federal Flat Tax Rate, which will be applied to all income types regardless of how they're earned, and set at a starting rate of 30%, which is basically the top rate our wealthiest Americans were paying anyways. And now let's see the impact of these changes on each class of Americans. Any effective rate net changes in green means those Americans are paying less in taxes, and any effective rate net changes in gray means those Americans are paying slightly more under the new system. The effective rate for the 40.9 million American tax filers in the poor and near poor classes dropped to 0%. So they are doing better under our new system. The effective rate for the 47.3 million American tax filers in the working class all dropped because of the expanded flat tax deduction, so they too are all doing better under our new system. The 65.6 million American tax filers in the middle and 5%er classes are either doing better or just slightly worse under our new system. But when you consider this could be the form we all use to complete our taxes every year, most Americans could start doing their taxes for the first time ever because of how simple our tax code would be. So the reduction in cost to acquire professional tax services and time reduction to complete one's tax return would more than offset those slight additional increases in taxes due. So the middle and 5%er classes would also be doing net better, which means that the 98.9% of American tax filers that earned less than $500,000 in 2019 would all fare better under this new tax system. And the top 1% are all plus or minus 1 or 2% from their old effective tax rates, but their top marginal tax rate would drop from 37% under the old system to 30% under our new system. So if they were actually paying the 37% marginal tax bracket, they would also be doing better under our new system. And our new tax code would be incredibly simple, and no one could claim it wasn't fair, and it would reduce tax compliance cost and time. But it would also add transparency to our tax code, which could provide equal representation in DC politics. In short, save our democracy, which was not the focus of my national debt project, but turned out to be the solution, because national debt turned out to be a political problem, not a financial one, which is something I wasn't expecting, but can be demonstrated by this example. Let's say that as a society, we agree that a 30% flat tax rate and flat deductions of $18,000 for a single filer and $36,000 for a married filer is a reasonable starting point or base scenario. That would yield about $2.6 trillion in revenue for the federal government. If a politician wanted to run on a campaign or propose a bill to decrease our flat tax rate from the current base scenario of 30% down to 29%, we'd know exactly who that helps and by how much, which is the beauty of a unified federal flat tax system. It's extremely transparent. On the low end, the 44 million people who weren't paying taxes were not impacted because you could drop the flat tax to zero and it wouldn't matter to them because they make less than the flat standard deduction. The working class gets a tax cut between $30 and $200 for the year. The middle class gets a tax cut between $350 and $1,100 for the year. The 5%ers about $2,500 for the year, and the top 1% somewhere between $6,000 and $280,000. So a 1% reduction in our tax rate impacts Americans massively different, from absolutely no impact at all the way to $280,000 of impact on average. At the federal level, the 1% reduction in tax rates costs the government $88 billion in tax revenue. So if the politician was required to say what spending he or she would cut to offset the revenue loss, we could make an informed decision on whether we supported the tax cut or not. If it was Medicare, the elderly could say no thank you, If it was education, the young could say no thank you, and if it was nothing at all, everyone could look at his or her benefit from the 1% tax rate cut and decide if it was worth adding $88 billion to our national debt. And since 94.3% of American tax filers would benefit by less than $1,186, for the first time that I can ever remember, society could make an informed decision about a tax bill. And I bet you that we would reject this tax bill because not enough people benefited by enough to warrant adding another $88 billion to our national debt. So no thank you, back to our base scenario. Well, let's say that we did have room to add $88 billion to national debt. And instead of reducing the flat tax rate by 1%, we asked the politician to raise the flat tax deduction from $18,000 to $19,850 for every single filer and double that for every married filer. That's a 10% increase in the amount every American can earn without paying taxes. The lost tax revenue to the government from this tax cut is still $88 billion, the exact same as dropping the tax rate by 1%. But instead of a majority of the benefit going to the top end, everyone received the exact same benefit of approximately $555 if single and $1,110 if married, because the increase to our flat tax deduction times the flat tax rate is the same for everyone, which is the most capitalistic tax system I can think of, where the government doesn't get to decide the winners and losers within our tax code. But what about spending increases? Let's say the left wants to build a solar farm to create more green energy, or the right wants to build a wall to increase border security, and they need $38 billion in taxes to accomplish this endeavor. But they don't want to increase taxes on anyone making under $50,000 in the working class because that sounds good politically. They could increase the flat tax rate by 1% from 30 to 31% and increase the flat tax deduction by $1,000 from $18,000 to $19,000. And they would have their additional $38 billion in tax revenue to proceed with the endeavor. The Americans that weren't paying taxes still aren't. The working class gets a slight tax decrease, the middle class a slight tax increase, but the bulk of the bill will be paid by the Americans who can most afford it, and after a year, when the endeavor is completed, everything can go back to our base scenario until the next political or societal endeavor is made known. And you may not have noticed it, but something unintended and really amazing just happened there. The transparency and fairness of our new flat federal tax system allowed us, as a society, to make informed decisions about our tax code for the first time. And it's very likely that the discretionary income of the top 0.01% that is often being contributed to political parties now to buy special tax breaks would be better spent on controlling unnecessary spending, because they would pick up a majority of the cost when the unified flat tax rate was increased. Which means that while everyone still gets one vote, the bottom 99.99% of Americans would start mattering again, because their collective voting power would balance out against their collective wealth and influence. So in the future, when we pass another Tax Cut and Jobs Act, ask yourself, how is this a Jobs Act if we're not reducing federal payroll taxes, which are the federal taxes being levied on workers' income for working at their job? And if we only reduce the federal income tax rate while adding new deductions to our tax code, don't forget to multiply your taxable income by the amount of the tax rate decrease to know how much of that tax cut was meant for you and how much of it was meant to reward a political donor. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribing, because this entire flat tax series was only one of 10 ideas that I'll be presenting in Tax Gap Part 3 on how to fix our tax system, because it's broke and it needs fixed. I'm Steven with WatchGuard Capital. Invest your time wisely.